Hello everyone, welcome to the React development tutorial. In this tutorial, we will talk about passing props to components. We have different components in our applications and we need to know how to pass some data from one component to another component. This data, we call it props or properties, and we need to know how to pass these data. So in this tutorial, we will learn about how to pass properties from one component to another component, and also we will learn how to pass properties or data from one page to another page. For example, you are on a home page and you want to send some data into about page, and we will learn how to do that. Let's go. Okay, here's the final product after finishing this tutorial. So we have a very simple form and we have some message on top of this form, and basically we have two pages that we will see how we navigate. We have the tutorial about router and how we navigate from one page to another. If you have not watched it, I highly recommend to watch that React router tutorial, so you will learn how to navigate between pages. We will briefly go over it, but it's better to just watch that tutorial. So in this tutorial, so as you can see, as soon as I type the name, this component will get updated. And also if I provide the last name and then go to the next page, you will see that it carried the name that I provided in the initial page. So first we pass props from one component to another one, which is in the same page. So I have a different component here, the header and the form. So this form passes some components to the home page and it passes to this view. And also I pass this data, the first name and last name, to the next page, so to the about page. So as you can see, whatever name I pass, it will show it here. So let's learn how to do that. Okay, in order to have a view like this, we need some view elements like this title, these fields, and this button. We learned how to get these view elements with these nice styles that it already built for us. We can go to this Bootstrap, React Bootstrap, that we already have a tutorial how to install this React Bootstrap, and then grab some of the UI elements. So I did that, and for our application, I can just copy paste these UI elements. It's very simple. This is the heading, and then I use the form element. I use the form for the label, and it has the name as the label, and it has a placeholder for the input field. And also there's another field which is for last name. This is the label for last name, and this is the input field for that last name. And at the end we have a submit button. All of the UI elements that you see here, this is the code for it, and you can find these code and copy paste them from this link that I mentioned. These are just simple view elements. We have to import the stuff as well, so make sure that you import the Bootstrap elements like this. If you're importing manually, you need to import form, and also since we're using the button, we can use the button. So that's all we need for basic structure of our application. Okay, now let's get some functionalities to these elements. Like, for example, I would like to have, whenever they type their name in this field, I would like to have it in the title as well, so they will feel more special when they type something on our application. When they type the name in the form, they will see their name on top of the screen that it's typed, and they feel welcomed. So that's one of the things that I would like to add. Also, I would like to add a functionality that when they type the last name as well and they hit submit, it goes to a next page and it shows that they submitted the form. So for now, I would just capture all of the view change or input change, and then we can just talk about how we can pass props from one page to another page. In previous tutorials, we learned how to capture the events and how we use React hooks. I have not talked about all of the hooks but we skimmily went through it when we use state, and we can use it here as well. I will reuse whatever we talked before, and as you can see, there is a use state here. It's called hook, and with that use state we can just define two props for our application, a name and a last name, and their own setters. So we need to be able to set these name and last name, and that's what is set state use state is doing. And we give it an initial value for this name and last name, an empty string. So our name and last name will start with empty string. And how do we handle the changes? We talked already about it. We can add some of the onChange handler, so we can define a different functions to do that. So for example, for the first name, on this input we can just define onChange handler. We have not defined this function, but we will define it shortly. We can do the same thing for the last name as well, so we can define onChange handler. So every time that something changes on these two fields, these functions will be called. What are these functions? Very simple. I can just add them and you will see what it does. It basically uses this set name for our function like this. So whenever you call this function, it calls this set name, and then it grabs the events of that field, and from that event it gets the target and value of whatever user types. That's all it does. And same thing for the last name. So we can define a function like handle change last name, which we defined here, and all it does, it's the same as this previous function, and it captures the event of change on that field, and then it gets the value out of it, and it sets it for our last name. And last thing that we need to do, we have to set the value of these fields. So it's set value, and the value will be basically this props, or the one that we just defined. Same thing for the last name, but the last name, the value will be last name. Yeah. So now we gave it a little bit functionality to our form, and I said that we need to we want to have the name at the title as well, or header. So let's test our application and see how it changed. So I expect that when I type something in the name field, it should show me in the header. So let's go and test it. So I would write Harry, and as you can see, it types in the header as well. And that's all for the basic functionality that I would like to have. Now I want to have separate components. Let's add. Okay, so we can simply have our application exactly like this and not worried about passing props into a different page or different component. But in real world application, it's not as simple as this. So if I keep adding the UI elements into one page, it will go to the thousands of lines and the code will get messy, and it doesn't look good and not readable easily. So how do we come up with the solution? We can just break it down into small components. So for example, I would like to have the header into a different component and this form to a separate component. So how do we do that? It's very simple. So since both of them are in home page, I can just go ahead and under the home directory, create a new file and add our header. So we can just click new file, and this is the ASX file, and call it header. So it creates a new file, and all it does, so for our application, so we know for now how we can create a new component from scratch. We should import first React, and then we can define a const, and this const is, we call it header. It already knows, and it's a function that returns a view basically. So return it requires a parentheses, And at the bottom, we have to export it basically. Export default and header. So that's something that we, this header. Okay. So then inside of this header, inside of this return, what do we need to pass? Basically this line of code. So let's copy it, or basically I instead of copy, I just cut it and put it over here. As you can see, it just crossed the name. So let me a little bit forget. So it crossed the name because it doesn't know the name was under this context here, but at this context, when we add it to a different component, it doesn't know. It says what is this name? I don't know what is this name. So this is the part that we should pass the props. So first I would define this new header that I defined here. So instead of having that element, we can just add or import that header that we defined. So it's very simple. WebStorm automatically imported, but for your view, if you're doing it manually, you can just import it from the path that you added, and it added here. So that's the first part. Now we need to pass this name that we have here into this component. There are a number of ways to add props to a component, but there's a simple way to do that. We can just simply say we want to pass a props and define a props called name, like the class name that we have here, but this one is customized. We want to have a name prop, and what is the value of this name prop? Basically is this name. So this one is the name of the props, and we get the name of a value of the props from this. It's complaining currently here because it says that this header component doesn't have a name property. So this is the way that we pass one property to another component. Now how do we use it? If I go to that component, I need to define a props here. Basically this is the place that we receive the props, and I put any as a type, and this is for TypeScript. We'll not talk about it right now, but I put any. It means that these props could be any type. It could be string, it could be an object, anything. So now from these props, I can just use dot notation and just access the name that I added here. And as you can see, it's no longer complaining because I just defined a prop called name. And that's how I pass this into the different components. So now if I render it, if it should act like before. So I type something, it should show it on top of the page. So from the view perspective, nothing has changed, but from the code perspective, it looks a little bit cleaner. And if I add this form into a different component, it will become much more cleaner. So that's the main part of adding a different components to simplify the view. So let's add the form also into a different component. And since it's the component of home, so again, it should be under the home, and I will create a new file, and I will call it passenger info, maybe page, passenger form. Since it's a form, we can call it passenger form. And we create it. We do the same thing here. I'll copy paste the whole thing. Currently, this is what we do. We first import it. Interesting. So let's try to zoom. So I will remove the part that I copied from the header. I call it passenger form, and I export it. This one also needs props, so that's why I keep the props as well. What does it go inside of it? Basically, I have to copy paste the whole thing here. So I cut it and go back here and paste it here. WebStorm is smart enough to import the button and form. but it has no clue what are these elements, like the name that we had in the header. Remember, we had to say props.name. We have to do the same thing here. We have to say props.name or props dot this function that we defined over there. Same thing for the other parts. So now this is inside of the component. Now we need to go back and pass these props in the home page. So first we have to import our new component. It's called passenger form. So I create this. Now we have to pass some props to it. So what are the props? One of them is name. That it's basically the name. The other one is last name, and it is equal last name. And the other one, I can just copy paste them. Handle change. So here, this one, and the last function. So as you can see, it doesn't matter if it's a function or it's a value, or we can pass anything. So in order to be more readable, I'll add into a different line. And as you can see, we pass 4 props here. I added 4 props here, and I accessed them from props here. So again, if I refresh the view, nothing should have changed from the view perspective. It should still look the same, and it should be functional still, and it's doing the same thing. Now it's the time that now we know how to pass props from one view to another view. But now we want to learn how to pass props from one page to another page. If we change the URL, how we pass data from one page to another. So let's do that. Okay, in our passenger form, there's a button that we had, but we never add a functionality behind it. So there is no click event here. So I would like to go to a different page when they click this submit button. And we already know that we can just say on click and then define our function that we want to have for our button. So here, since I don't have the function on here defining here, we have to define it like the props. So we will pass this function later to this component. So for now, we can just say, don't worry, we will pass this props into your component. But for now, whenever I click on this button, make sure that you call this function, click handle on click. So then I go back to the home page, and I see that I have not passed this on click here. So I better handle it here. Sorry, handle click. So this way, now we are passing this passing this props, which is a function, to our passenger form. Now it's complaining because we have not defined this function. Let's define it. We can say const and define the function, and basically it's a function. And what do we do here? If you watch the tutorials before for React Router, there's a way that we can move from one view to another using a hooks, and there's a hooks called use navigate. I first imported here and use navigate, and then I can use it here to navigate from one page to another. So let's do that. And that's the simple way to so currently it says navigate, but I have to use basically these hooks on top of the view. So I can say let navigate is equal use navigate, the use navigate that we just defined here, and then we can use this navigate const let variable to navigate. Okay, let's test this button that we just defined the onClick handler, and also on the home page this props, and see if it's working and move us to the about page. So if you see some style change here, don't worry, I'll talk about the style. and how you left align these name and last name and add some padding or margining around here. So just don't worry about the UI element. But for now, I just add some name and some last name, and all I want to see if it's submit button take me to the about page. And as you can see, it took me to about page, but the about page is very empty. So if I open about page, as you can see, it's empty. That's why it doesn't show anything. Now I would like to pass the first name and last name, this first name and last name from a home page to our about page. This is the place that I would like to add. So the way that we pass is very simple. It takes this function, this navigate, takes another argument that we can pass our stuff, and we can store it in the state, and this state is something that you can call anything, but I call it state, and you can pass it like this, name and last name. So basically we are using this navigate, which is a hook, to pass our first name and last name. And how do we use it in about page? There's a very simple way and straightforward. Again, there's a hook that we can use. I mentioned that earlier, that we will have a huge session about React hooks. It's very simple, but for now you just should know that the things that I'm using here, these are called hooks. This use, whenever it called, there's a use at the beginning, most of the time it's hooks, React hooks. But don't worry about the name, don't get confused, we'll just see the functionality. So all we're trying to do is we're passing these value, first name and last name, into about page while we are navigating. So I use these hooks and get some last name, first name from there. So what do I want to show in this view? I would just keep it simple. It's just a paragraph, PA, and I'll have some text on it. I would say thank you, and I will have the name here. I'll call it the name. I would like to add the name here. Thank you, for example, Harry, and the last name for sure. Last name. Right now you see that it shows it red because it doesn't know where to get this first name and last name. And one thing that you should notice, that every time we put curly brace, it means that it's a code. But if it's outside of curly brace, it's not a code. That's why this thank you is not red, and it reads the text, and it's just kind of like a hard-coded value. But whenever you put it inside of the curly brace, it wants to find it from a variable or somewhere, and that's why it makes it red. And then I would say thank you, you successfully submitted the form. So I can just copy paste the rest. Successfully submitted the form. And that's how I wanted to show in the about page. Nothing very special. How do I access this last name, first name, which I passed them from the home page? It's very simple. Using this location, I can just say location dot and the state that I mentioned earlier, and that's it. It should know. The same thing for the last name as well. So if you remember, we added state, and then we're using dot notation, state dot name or state dot last name, in order to access this first name and last name. So okay, here's the results. It gets the name, it gets the last name, and if I submit, it goes to the about page, and it shows my first name and last name passed with the hard-coded text that we had already. So in order to make it a little bit bold, I can just put the B tag around the first name and last name. That's what I did for the demo that I showed at the beginning of the tutorial. So I can just put this one and save it and go back here, and you see it gets bold. So about the styling part, let's go to the style part. If we want to style our components, we can just add a new folder here. So since all of the styles are related to this home page, we can just add a new folder and call it styles. And under styles, I can just simply add the styles for each component. So for example, I want a different style for the header. I can add a new file called, and say it's SCSS file, I can just call it header, maybe small letters, header. So it's an empty file, it added here, and the same thing for passenger form. I'll add a new style file called passenger form, and it adds it right over here. If I have some style for header as well, I can just say header, homepage, I'll call it homepage SCSS. But for now, I just have style for header and passenger form. And we can add these styles to our application. So don't forget to import them in your components. So for example, in the header, I can say import and say the styles, and what is this file? It says header. So we import the header here, and we'll do the same thing for passenger form as well. We can say import and passenger styles and passenger forms. So now we imported these styles. Now we can just give it some style. In order to have, so if I go to the previous page, in order to have this one in the middle and these on the left hand side, I've noticed that in app CSS we have some style that I can get rid, and mostly this one, this app align center, makes everything to be center. So what I can do is just remove this, and as you can see, if I save it and go back to the application, everything by default goes to the left hand side. And now I can just give everything some class name and style it like the way it should be. I'll give some styles because this tutorial is not about styling part, but I just want you to get familiar with the structure of our application and how we add the styles to different components. And this is how you can do that. For each component or page, you have a folder, and then underneath it has a style. All of them are based on your preference. If you prefer to have your style somewhere else, you can do that. But this is my preference, that if I have some component, I would like to have the styles folder, and then right underneath this home, I can just have another folder called tests and add all of my unit tests related to these components. That's all from this tutorial. So I will finish it up. I'll add all of the styling to look nice and good, so you can take a look at all of the styles and the items that, because currently they're empty, but I will add it after I post this tutorial. And you can see the final product, which I showed at the beginning of this tutorial. I hope you learned it well. Let me know if you have any questions, and share, subscribe, like, anything you can.